The year was 1702, when the Atlantic Ocean seemed wider, darker, and far less forgiving than any map could capture. Even the bravest mariners admitted that the sea was a kingdom of its own, ruled not by kings, but by storms, silence, and secrets. Buried in fathoms no diver could reach, Captain Elias Blackthorne stood at the quarterdeck of the Sovereign's Wrath, his scarred hands gripping the rail as a veil of gray fog rolled across the water. His men worked in tense silence, trimming sails and watching the horizon as though it might sprout monsters. Sailors of the 1700s were not strangers to superstition. Half of seafaring life was fought against phantoms of the mind. Yet this fog was different. It did not drift but clung, swallowing sound and stretching in all directions as if it had no end. "Steady, lads," Blackthorne growled, his voice carrying the weight of command. "The sea tests us, aye, but the sea has never bested us." The men nodded, though their eyes betrayed fear. They had heard the rumors whispered in Portsmouth taverns before their departure rumors of an armada of ghost ships, a fleet that rose from the deep when the moon was swallowed by mist. Some swore it was a Spanish fleet cursed by God for unholy bargains, others that it was the drowned navy of Atlantis itself. Whatever the truth, every man aboard the Sovereign's Wrath felt the same thing as they pressed deeper into the fog, that they were no longer alone. Blackthorne himself had scoffed at the notion of cursed fleets, but orders were orders. The Crown had demanded answers after merchant convoys vanished on routes once considered safe. Survivors mad with fear spoke of a colossal ship, a floating fortress so vast that it blotted out the stars. A ship that carried hundreds of lanterns, glowing in its rib cage of blackened wood. A ship that should not, by the laws of shipwrights and men, exist. The fog thickened until day dimmed into twilight. The ocean lay still, its waves oddly subdued, like the breath of a sleeping beast. A low sound drifted across the water, first mistaken for wind, then unmistakably something else, the toll of a bell. Every sailor froze. The bell tolled again, long and mournful, the kind rung for funerals or ships lost at sea. Then, like a mountain, materializing from mist, it appeared. The crew gasped as their eyes climbed higher and higher still. Looming in the fog was not one ship, but what seemed an entire fortress at sea. Towering masts tangled like black trees, rigging stretched in impossible webs, and along its vast hull glowed countless windows lit by ghostly lanterns. The size of the vessel dwarfed anything known in the 1700s, larger than any galleon or man-o'-war ever conceived. Its sails, though ragged and thin as shrouds, caught no wind, yet it drifted forward with steady purpose. "Holy Mother of God," whispered Quartermaster Briggs, making the sign of the cross. "It's true." The men backed. Away from the rail, some muttering prayers, others clutching talismans. The ship's silence was more terrible than cannon fire. It moved like a city of the dead, lanterns glowing as if souls were trapped within each flame. Blackthorne's heart thundered, though his face betrayed no fear. "Hold steady, damn you all. We are Englishmen, not children frightened of bedtime tales." Yet even as he barked the order, he could not shake the feeling that he stared upon something not meant for mortal eyes. His gut told him that the ship was not simply seen, it was allowing itself to be seen. The phantom vessel drew nearer, its sheer scale forcing Blackthorne to crane his neck upward. The hull seemed endless, black and barnacled, as though it had sailed since the birth of the ocean. And then, as swiftly as it had appeared, the lanterns dimmed. The masts faded into the mist, the outline blurred, and within moments it was gone, swallowed whole by fog, leaving only silence and a trembling crew behind. For a full minute no one spoke. Then Briggs turned to his captain, his face pale as bone. "Sir, what manner of ship was that?" "The kind," Blackthorne replied grimly, "that leaves graves in its wake." That night, the crew could not shake the vision. Rum and prayers flowed in equal measure below deck, but neither soothed their terror. Some swore they had seen figures moving across the Phantom ship's decks, shadows of sailors long dead, bound forever to duty. Others claimed to hear voices, calling from the fog, beckoning them to join. Blackthorne retreated to his cabin, staring over maps littered with reports of vanishing ships. Each red mark on the parchment seemed to form a trail, and now he knew where it led, deeper into the Atlantic, into waters no sane captain dared to linger. His candle guttered as a draft slipped through the cabin. He looked up, and for an instant saw a wet handprint pressed upon the glass of his stern window. By the time he blinked, it was gone. Blackthorne clenched his jaw. He had sailed against pirates, storms, and navies alike, but never against something born of myth. Yet duty, pride, and perhaps a measure of madness drove him on dot at dawn. He addressed the men. "You have seen it now, as I have. The legends are true. This is no merchant raider, no fleet of flesh and blood. But mark me, we shall hunt it all the same. We are not cowards, but hunters. If this phantom fleet claims the Atlantic, we will drag it into the light and send it back to the abyss." Some cheered weakly, clinging to their captain's certainty. Others muttered that men could not fight shadows. But the course was set, and the sails filled with morning wind out as the Sovereign's wrath cut through the waves. Blackthorne knew. The game had begun. The ghost ship had revealed itself once. It would again. And when it did, he intended to follow it into whatever hell awaited. The days that followed their first sighting of the phantom vessel gnawed at the men's sanity. Sailors who once laughed in the face of storms now whispered in corners, their eyes darting toward the mist that seemed to cling to the ship's wake. No matter how far they sailed, ropes frayed without cause, compasses spun like mad dancers, and the sea itself seemed to grow restless. Captain Elias Blackthorne remained on deck longer than any man, his stern gaze sweeping the horizon as if he could summon the phantom ship by will alone. The encounter had unsettled him, though he would sooner bite through his own tongue than admit it. He had spent his life mastering the ocean, yet this thing was something outside the dominion of men. On the seventh night, when the moon was a pale coin behind clouds, Quartermaster Briggs sought the captain in his cabin. His hands trembled, though his voice remained steady. "Captain, I've spoken to the men. They're near to breaking. Some believe that ship carries the souls of the damned. Others say it's the Armada of Spain, risen from the deep to take vengeance upon England." Blackthorne looked up from the charts spread across his desk, their ink smudged with seawater. "Armada or no, it bleeds like any ship. I mean to prove it." Briggs hesitated, then leaned closer. "Sir, have you heard the name? The Armada of Eternal Night?" The words seemed to thicken the air. Blackthorne narrowed his eyes. "Speak plain." Briggs swallowed. "I knew a sailor in Kingston, a Spaniard who swore he'd seen it." "Sighed?" "The ship was built by Admiral Alaric de Montoya back in the late 1600s. Montoya craved dominion over the seas, but Spain's coffers were bleeding, their empire waning. So Montoya made a bargain, not with king nor crown, but with something darker. They say he called upon the spirits of the abyss, offering blood and sacrifice for a fleet that could never be sunk." Blackthorne frowned, though a cold finger of unease traced his spine. "And this Spaniard? He lived to tell the tale?" "Barely. Claimed the Armada took his ship. He alone was spared, to spread the warning. He died raving in a fever. Not a week later." The captain leaned back, his jaw tightening. Sailors' tales were salt and smoke, but the memory of that colossal vessel, lanterns burning in the mist, gnawed at his reason. Could a bargain with the abyss truly give rise to such a monster of timber and sail? By morning, the Sovereign's Wrath turned south, charting a course toward the Caribbean, where whispers of the Armada were strongest. The voyage was uneventful at first, but as they neared the equatorial waters, the sea changed. Winds shifted, without warning, carrying the stench of rot. Schools of fish swam belly up. Even the gulls abandoned them, leaving an empty sky above Dot. It was there, in the still waters off the coast of West Africa, that they encountered a drifting hulk of Portuguese. Slaver, its sails shredded, its crew nowhere in sight. The deck was slick with salt and silence. Only a single survivor remained, a boy no older than 16, found half-mad in the hold, muttering in broken Portuguese and Spanish. Through an interpreter, they pieced together his tale. The boy's ship had been seized not by pirates, but by the Great Ship of Lanterns. He described towering decks filled with soldiers who bore no flesh, only bones and rusted armor. The captain, a man with eyes like burning coals, had demanded the souls of all aboard. When asked how he escaped, the boy only wept. The crew of the Sovereign's Wrath crossed themselves and muttered prayers. Blackthorne, however, felt grim determination set in. Each story, each survivor, each cursed whisper, it all pointed to one truth. The Armada of Eternal Night was real, and it was hunting. That night, the sea fell eerily calm. The ship drifted as though caught in the breath of some vast, unseen lung. Then came the sound again, the mournful toll of a bell. Men scrambled to the rails, their eyes wide with terror. Out of the fog, shadows moved masts, rigging, and hulls too many to count. Not one ship, nor even two, but an entire fleet materialized, their sails black, their lanterns glowing with hellish fire. At the center of the Armada loomed the colossal vessel, the same fortress Blackthorne had seen before. The men whispered frantic prayers. Briggs clutched the rail so hard his knuckles split. Dear God in heaven, it's an entire navy. Cannons lined the decks of the Phantom fleet, there, muzzles glowing with pale fire. Yet no shot was fired. The ships merely drifted closer, silent but for the groan of timbers and the tolling of their ghostly bells. Then, from across the water, voices rose a chant, low and terrible, like the murmur of a congregation buried beneath the sea. The sound pressed into the men's skulls, a tide of despair. Some dropped to their knees, weeping. Others clutched knives, desperate to cut their own throats to escape the sound. Blackthorne stood tall, though his stomach churned. Hold fast. Remember who you are. We are no cowards to drown in fear. But even as he shouted, the Phantom fleet closed in. He could see them now, sailors in rusted breastplates, their faces bare skulls, eye sockets burning with faint blue fire. They moved with rigid precision, manning ropes and rigging though their ships required no wind. On the colossal flagship's quarterdecks stood a figure cloaked in black, his eyes glowing like embers beneath a shadowed helm. Admiral Alaric de Montoya, though miles of water lay between them, Blackthorne swore the Spaniard's gaze met his own. A cruel smile tugged the corners of that spectral mouth, and a voice, carried not by wind, but by something darker, reached across the waves. Join us, or be taken. The Phantom fleet lingered only minutes, but to the crew it felt like a lifetime. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the mist thickened, and one by one the ships dissolved into shadow. The lanterns dimmed. The chanting ceased. Only the silence of the ocean remained. When the fog finally cleared, the Armada was gone. The men collapsed where they stood, their spirits frayed to threads. Some swore they had lost years of their lives in those moments. Others muttered that they could still hear the chant echoing in their ears. Blackthorne, however, did not falter. His fists clenched the rail, his eyes burning with grim resolve. He turned to Briggs and said, "We've seen their commander. We've heard his offer. Now we know the truth of it. If Montoya thinks he can claim my soul or my ship, he'll soon learn that English steel and English fire do not bow to specters. But deep within, a single question gnawed at him like rot in the hull. What if Montoya could not be killed? The fog returned 3 nights later. It rolled in with the speed of a charging bull, thick and suffocating, swallowing the stars above and the waves below. Men shouted in alarm as the ship's lanterns flickered, their light seeming to shrink. Rather than pierce the gloom, Captain Elias Blackthorne stood upon the quarterdeck of the Sovereign's Wrath, his coat snapping in the unnatural wind. He had felt it in his bones for hours, the weight of unseen eyes, the prickle of something vast stirring just beyond sight. And then came the bell, the same dreadful toll as before, deep and resonant, echoing across the water as though rung in. The belly of the sea itself. The men froze, their faces pale. One dropped his rope and whispered, "God preserve us." Lanterns flared to life in the mist. One by one, then dozens, then hundreds. Ships materialized around them in a great crescent, their black hulls looming, their masts rising like gallows. At the center, immense and terrible, was the Phantom flagship, the floating fortress with its countless glowing windows. Its sails spread, though no wind filled them. The Armada of Eternal Night had returned. Ready the guns. Blackthorne bellowed, his voice cutting through the swell of fear. "Run out every last cannon." The men scrambled, some with shaking hands, but the familiar work steadied them. Cannon hatches swung open, iron muzzles jutted out, and powder boys raced to their stations. From across the water, pale fire flared within the Phantom cannons. The fleet was preparing to answer. Steady. Blackthorne raised his cutlass high. His heart thundered, but his eyes blazed with fury. If this was to be their end, they would carve their names into the sea with iron and flame. Fire! Thunder split the night. A broadside of iron roared across the waves, smashing into the nearest ghostly hull. Wood splintered, sails shredded, but then, impossibly, the damage healed before their eyes. Timbers knit back together like flesh closing over a wound. The Phantom fleet answered. Their cannons roared, but instead of iron shot, spheres of pale green fire streaked across the water. They slammed into the Sovereign's Wrath, burning without flame, scalding wood and flesh alike. Men screamed as ghostly fire clung to them, burning without smoke. Blackthorne gritted his teeth. "We can't kill it with powder alone." Briggs staggered to his side, his face slick with sweat. "Then what hope have we, Captain?" Blackthorne's gaze locked on the Phantom flagship, looming larger than any castle, its lanterns glowing like the eyes of a beast. "We take the fight to its heart." The words sent a chill through Briggs. "Board her? You'll damn us all." "Better damned by choice than taken in chains," Blackthorne snarled. He turned to the men. "Launch the boats." Ready grappling. "Hooks, we're going aboard." The crew obeyed, some with grim resolve, others with wild desperation. Longboats splashed into the water, carrying armed sailors into the choking fog. The sea itself seemed to groan, as though disapproving of their audacity. The Phantom flagship loomed like a mountain, its timbers black as tar, its sides bristling with silent guns. Grappling hooks flew, biting into the rail. Ropes tightened, and the men swarmed up the sides like ants on a corpse. Blackthorne was the first over the rail. His boots hit the deck, and a chill coursed through him, as though he had stepped onto a grave. The deck stretched endlessly, lined with lanterns that burned with steady, unnatural flame. The wood beneath his feet was slick, yet not with water. It pulsed faintly, as though alive. Figures emerged from the mist. Sailors clad in rusted armor and rotted uniforms, their faces bare skulls, eyes burning with blue fire. They carried cutlasses, pikes, and muskets, all encrusted with centuries of decay. Yet they moved with military precision, forming ranks as though centuries had not dulled their discipline. "Stand fast." Blackthorne roared. He drew his sword, its steel gleaming in the ghostly light. "They can bleed, or they can break, but by God, they will not take us without a fight." The clash came swift and terrible. Muskets cracked, cutlasses rang, and screams tore through the fog. Blackthorne fought like a man possessed, his blade carving through skeletal foes whose bones shattered but did not bleed. They rose again and again, bound to unholy duty. Only when he drove his sword through their skulls did they fall still, their blue flames guttering out. Briggs fought at his side, hacking wildly. "Captain, there's no end to them." "Then we find the one who commands them," Blackthorne snarled. They pressed through the ranks of the dead, deeper into the ship. Lanterns burned along endless corridors, illuminating scenes of grotesque eternity. Skeleton crews manning ropes that needed no pulling, shadows feasting in silence at long banquet tables, and halls lined with portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow intruders. Finally, they reached the quarterdeck. There, standing tall and regal in a black cloak, was Admiral Alaric de Montoya. His eyes glowed like twin embers beneath a plumed hat, his skeletal hands resting on a cutlass whose blade shimmered with green fire. "You trespass upon my eternal dominion." Montoya's voice boomed, though his jaw barely moved. "It was not," sound the thought, echoing in their minds. "Your courage is admirable, your defiance futile." Blackthorne stepped forward, his sword slick with the dust of fallen dead. "Montoya, your fleet preys on men who cannot fight you. I'll see your curse broken, even if I must drag you to hell myself." Montoya's skull seemed to grin. Bold words, mortal. "You may join me, become part of my armada, and sail forever. Beyond hunger, beyond fear, beyond death. Or," his eyes flared brighter, "you may perish and feed the abyss that sustains us." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the creak of cursed timbers. Then Blackthorne spat. "I'll see you rot." Montoya drew his blade, and the duel began. Steel clashed against fire as Blackthorne met the admiral's blows. Montoya's strikes were impossibly swift, fueled by something beyond mortal sinew. Sparks of green and silver rained across the deck. As their swords collided, each strike rattled Blackthorne's bones, but he fought on, driven by fury and the knowledge that if he fell, his men were lost. He dodged a blazing cut, rolled beneath Montoya's guard, and slashed across the admiral's ribs. The blow carved through rotted cloth, but the wound knit instantly, leaving no mark. Montoya laughed, a hollow sound that scraped against the soul. "You cannot kill what death has already claimed." Blackthorne's heart pounded. If Montoya could not be slain, then the key was not his body, but his bond. Something bound him and the fleet to this cursed existence. His eyes darted across the quarterdeck. There, behind Montoya's command chair, lay a chest bound in iron and etched with Spanish sigils. From it emanated a faint glow, red as blood. "The logbook," Blackthorne muttered. Briggs, panting at his side, followed his gaze. Without another word, Briggs lunged. Skeleton guards intercepted him, but he cut them down in a frenzy, diving for the chest. Montoya roared, his fiery eyes flaring as he struck at Blackthorne with renewed fury. The captain parried desperately, his muscles burning. "Briggs," he shouted, "get it open." The quartermaster slammed his cutlass into the lock. The chest groaned, the sigils blazing with crimson light. With a final heave, it burst open. Inside lay a leather-bound logbook, its pages soaked in blackened blood. The very air shuddered as it was lifted free, as though the ship itself resisted. Montoya howled, his form flickering. "That is mine. Return it, or be damned beyond damnation." But Blackthorne seized the logbook from Briggs, holding it high. The lanterns around them guttered, the decks trembling as though the ship itself were alive and enraged. He had found the Armada's heart. Asterisk.